Well, kia ora. Welcome everybody to this session. We are here talking about impact investing. My name is Stephen Moe. Tēnā koutou katoa. No America ho no te tematanga, ko te taita toku manga, ko waitaki toku awa, ko otatahi toku kainga inai nei, e roia toku tunga mahi o Perryfield Lawyers, ko Stephen Moe toku ingoa, no reira ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to welcome you all here. I'm so excited that there's been lots of interest. And I know many of you are watching this as a recording afterwards because you weren't able to attend in person. We would love to make this as interactive as possible. Shamubeel and I, we don't want to just be the only ones sharing. And the easiest way, given technology, is if you use the chat function. So as we're going through, we would love to be looking over and seeing, oh, there's a comment, there's a question, there's a link maybe to something that you think would be relevant. It's a chance, more than just like a TV show or watching something. This is a chance to build community and actually get to know each other and to share thoughts. So we want to encourage that. To begin, I'm just going to read whakatoki. So, whakataka te ho ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tanga, kia makina kina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai, e hi ake ane te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hahu, ti he Maori ora. Now that actually is something that I think I first heard it at a conference, and the Honorable Justice Joseph Williams was there, and he shared about what the actual meaning was. And I got his permission to make it a podcast episode of Seeds podcast. So in the chat, I'm putting a link to that because it's a really beautiful explanation of what this actually means. So just starting with that. So welcome, everybody. My name's Stephen Moe, if I haven't met you yet. I'm a partner at Perryfield Lawyers. We're a law firm based in Christchurch. We've got about 80 staff in 4 different offices. And I've had a career where in the first half of it, I was really focused on lots of big deals, banks, corporates, buying and selling. I was based in London for 3 years. I was based in Tokyo for 4 years, Sydney for 4 years. Despite having an accent, I actually grew up here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and qualified as a lawyer here back in 2001. And so the first half of my career was focused on those big deals and things. The second half, about 8 years ago, when I came back to live in New Zealand, has been focused on impact and purpose. How can we use what we have to have maximum benefit for the people who really need it? So within that focus, I've been looking at things like social enterprise and charities and philanthropy, and impact investing has been a big part of the work that I'm doing as well. So what this is really is a chance. Shamubeel is very generous with his time. This is a chance to release a legal opinion. And I'm just putting it in the chat now. So at this link, you can actually go and download the opinion, like it's available now. After this video, I'll be sending an email that has a link to this session, as well as a PDF of the legal opinion. But you can go ahead, like the link is there, you can download it now. The other thing that I'm hoping that you'll do, if you really resonate with what we're talking about today, is if you're willing to help share the word about it. So I'm just in the chat going to drop a LinkedIn post that I just did, and that also has a way for people to get access to this legal opinion. So what is this legal opinion? It's looking at impact investing, and it's challenging the paradigm of thinking when it comes to how do we use our funds, particularly those entities, foundations, charities, small and big, that have assets. And so I reached out to Shamubeel Eaqub, who I've been able to get to know really well, and we sit on a board together, actually kind of 2 boards, don't we, Shamubeel? And so we've been getting to know each other a couple years, and I really appreciate his friendship and the insights that he brings to a complicated topic. And so I said to him, would you be willing to be a conversation partner during this launch, and he very kindly agreed. So I really don't need to introduce you, Shamubeel, apart from saying that you're, I think, New Zealand's leading economist, but that you do it all with heart. And that's the thing that strikes me whenever I hear you speak. Like, yes, you know your stuff, but underlying it, I know that there's a heart for our country, for the people. Like, it's more than just numbers. And so what I'd like to ask you to do is just give us a little bit of a grounding in terms of where we're at, why this topic is relevant, and then we're going to get into a couple questions. So I'll just hand it over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. What a generous introduction. I can't claim credit for all of that, but look, there is so much going on in our country, and I think we do need to think about how do we all play our part. And within that, I think the conversation we want to have today is perhaps a top-down view of the not-for-profit sector and the charitable sector, or the third sector, and what do I see as some of the issues, and how can we all partner together to kind of unleash the potential that's there. And I guess for me, the way that I think about it is the third sector has always been very important in New Zealand and around the world in meeting social needs. If you think back to the Second World War, when we kind of built up the welfare state in the aftermath to never repeat what had happened, it was still not perfect. Even though we had built this welfare and safety net, we had wanted essentially some kind of central model that would take care of a lot of the issues in society. So we wouldn't need to rely on each other in quite the same extent, that the safety net would be strong, that it wouldn't have holes. But the reality is there have always been some holes, and the third sector had always been that place to meet those needs. But then we also had those reforms in the 1980s that I think really shifted what it means to have a safety net, and that safety net over time has really eroded. It's become increasingly grudging and mean, and we can't pretend that our welfare state can look after everybody anymore. And it never has, and I don't think it ever will. So from my perspective, the third sector's work has become even more important than it was in the past, because there is just so much unmet need in our community that government is unwilling and unable to meet that. We also know that the third sector is extraordinarily good at identifying need and being flexible and effective in what it does. In some of the spaces that I have had the pleasure of working with in the past, in community housing, in mental health, in drug addiction, in disability, in problem debt, you work with people in the third sector that are really innovating and really responding to the need. That's only possible when you're close to the people who need help. But I also need that, they're meant to provide a caring, flexible, and long-term solution, but they rely on insecure resourcing and funding and capacity. So there's this strange thing where we can clearly see there's so much need for their services, which are effective and flexible, but we do it with funding and mechanisms and resourcing that is really quite, I think, low and inflexible and quite often very short term. And that funding quite often comes from government, from donors, but most importantly, what I see amongst the third sector is just the deep wells of goodwill that we use from our volunteers and our workforce who would otherwise be earning a hell of a lot more money somewhere else. So we've kind of run this model right to the ground, I think. We rely so much on this sector, but we don't fund it well, we don't pay it well, we don't have enough capacity, and we don't have resourcing. And quite often the idea of the third sector is how can we push out delivery to these places as a means for reducing costs, not necessarily for resourcing capability and solving the problems, but doing that. And those wins can quite often be about, plaques and cutting ribbons. So it feels a little bit short term in nature. And the funding is quite often for programs, projects, outcomes, but very rarely is there funding that's for operations, for investment in capacity and capability, all those things that we need in a thriving business or a thriving third sector. So for me, the conversation that I want to have with you today, Stephen, is that we have a society that's increasingly fractured. We have institutions like clubs, churches, and unions that are in decline. The third sector is stepping into that breach to try and provide some of those things. But at the same time, our current model of funding, financing, looking after a third sector is not quite right. And if we're going to rely on the same funding model to do better things in the future, it's not going to work. So what can we do that's in our control that can make the third sector more sustainable and effective? I truly believe that, money can be a force for good. And the question for me is, how can we unleash the money that's already in New Zealand with the donors that are already aligned to the missions, but somehow they're not joined up? Is there a way we can put that together? So, Stephen, when I read your legal opinion, so for me, the big light bulb that went off was, well, here is a way we can take what's already there and really unleash it. And so I'd probably like to start with asking you a few questions. And the first one is probably just expanding on what you started with. When you came back to New Zealand, you were much more interested in the social side of things. Can you just expand on why is it that you're so interested in the sector and impact investing in particular?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for that intro. It's always love to hear you sharing. I think for me, I just see that there's so much potential. The word I'm going to use is potential. And I look around and I see so much need at the same time. And in particular, I see a massive disconnect, which is that there's many groups which actually have a lot of wealth. And there's no typo here when I say billions of dollars. Like if we aggregated everything together, I'm talking about across all of these different community-focused trusts or foundations or family, setups, there's a vast amount of wealth which traditionally has been invested conservatively. And yet I see massive need. And the picture I like to give is I feel like people are saying we're saving for the rainy day. Like we've got to wait. It's gonna rain sometime. We need to sit on these funds because at some point we're gonna need to use them. And my answer is it's raining now. It's actually raining now. Now is the time that we need to think creatively and imaginatively about the problems that are facing us. And so my hope is that by writing this little paper, that it will stimulate a discussion at board levels that maybe traditionally people have had kind of a keep it safe, keep it hidden sort of approach. I mean, I love that scene. We've probably all of us have seen Lord of the Rings, right? Gandalf coming up to the little hobbit and saying, hide the ring away, put it away so no one can see it, keep it safe, keep it hidden. And it feels to me like that's also the mentality of many people who are sitting on this wealth. And what if we gave them an alternative narrative, an alternative story about how they can be involved in having impact? So that's really it. And then if it's okay, I'm going to share one little visual picture, which is this. You might not recognize this. I actually got this from Barcelona. It's from the church, the Sagrada Familia, which has been built. So Gaudi was the designer, and it's got these amazing, intricate, like it's just a work of art. And if you look at Gaudi, when did he die? It was about 1924, and they're still working on this church. So the point is of that story, it's an intergenerational perspective beyond the short term, actually building the cathedral. We have one part to play in our moment here on earth. What will we do with the resources we've been given? But I think having that longer term perspective gives you a lot of clarity because we get so caught up in the immediate, and actually we need to have the bigger, longer perspective. So for me, it's about encouraging people to stop sitting on safe decisions and start pushing the boat out to be able to focus on impact.
And so specifically, when you talk about that, are you describing the fact that most funds invest their funds traditionally and they pay out from the profits essentially?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the picture, I mean, it's totally understandable as well. And to be honest, I probably do this in my personal life as well. Like I look and okay, what's the term deposit rate? What percentage will I get back if I invest? But I think if you take it to the next level and you say, well, actually, here's a trust that's been endowed. Let's pick a specific thing. So it's been endowed to help reduce um, poverty. And that's, there's four charitable heads at law. They originate back in 1601. We still are traced back to there. So reduction of poverty is one of the four heads. The others are advancing education, advancing religion, purpose beneficial to the community. But let's say that there's a trust which has been endowed with, say, $10 million to reduce poverty. And what I worry is that the trustees are sitting around the table going, well, what percentage interest rate can we get if we invest in a term deposit? And so, and then here's the critical bit. How can we use the money that comes back from the interest for good? So it's a conception which is focusing on the returns from the capital that they've got. And what I am trying to do with this little opinion is to challenge that and say, yes, that's one very important way that you can have impact. But there's another important way because right now you're making decisions to invest that $10 million. And let's just use a silly example, but let's say 2 million of it is on call with a mainstream bank and it's earning an interest rate. Well, where are the profits from that going? They're going offshore. And how much are you actually making versus an alternative of saying, let's invest that money in something that will have impact? So it's harder. It's not easier, it's harder. Okay, I want to acknowledge that. But if you could take that 2 million and go out, and if there was something which was focused on reducing poverty, and you could invest it and get financial return and have impact because the thing that you had made possible was reducing poverty, then I think that is a new sort of paradigm or conception. And that's what I want to get across, that this might be an option.
Yeah, and I think in reading your legal opinion, you're not saying that all of the funds have to be invested in that way, but it's about taking practical steps to try and go, if there are mission-aligned ways of investing, why would you not take that? Stephen, before we jump into that, I see in the chat and was one of the questions that I already want to ask you was something just a little bit deeper. A lot of philanthropies are really focused on funding programs, projects, and outcomes, but unwilling to fund operations and building capacity and capability.
Yeah.
What's your view that, is it mission aligned if you're investing in the running of the NFP or the third sector versus the programs that they deliver?
Yeah, that's a great point. And my view is that it actually needs to be both. And I think too often, I really love the phrasing that you used, like focusing on the ribbon cutting. We're there for the big event, the unveiling of the thing, but actually, are we funding the operations? Because there's a lot of mahi, a lot of work that it takes to be able to then deliver. So this is another form of mindset shift, maybe rather than just focusing on outcomes, it's having a bigger conception.
And is there also an element of, when people talk about things like value for money or getting, good return on their investments, like how much of it is reasonable to expect that people who work in the third sector should be taking a significant wage cut to be doing good? Like how much exploitation of goodwill should be built into the system? Like, is there a legal opinion to that?
Yeah, yeah. I love the way you phrase things. Exploitation of goodwill. I think it happens all the time. And to be honest, I think there's a bunch of people on this call because I see that, we got more than 100 people joining us. I know that a lot of them have probably wrestled with this as well. There's lots of paradigm shifts we're talking about here. I actually think that we're underserving this whole sector. because we have this expectation that you do things for free, or that you're somehow going to have to take a massive cut because you're working in a for-purpose area. As a side note, I've been using that phrasing, for purpose, rather than not for profit, because I think, why do we talk about what we are not, and why is it in relation to for profit? I've written a whole thing on that if anybody's interested. But that's my kind of feeling, is that actually we want to have the best outcomes, and we need to pay people correctly to get that. I know that there's going to be a bunch of comments there saying, but we don't have the money. But I think to attract the people who can then help to generate the ideas, which can then have the projects and the outcomes that we're seeking, that's just a really important part of it as well.
To me, it feels like there is this kind of inability to attribute how much of your funding that goes towards operation can be attributed to the mission-aligned outcomes that you're looking for. And so I think there is a lot of gray area in this space in terms of how close do you have to be to the delivery for it to be aligned to that mission of the foundation or for the trust that's giving that money. Can I ask you, from your experience, are we quite good at giving money out from the returns relative to the investing? Like, are we actually good at mission alignment in the way that we give out money at the moment?
Well, the first part of that answer is, do we actually understand what we're there for? Like, what is our mission? I think a lot of boards, particularly those that people have been there for a while, so I think sometimes they haven't read their purposes for years, maybe decades. So I think one of the first challenges to boards is simply, what is our mission? What is our purpose? And I know that sounds so basic, but I've dealt with dozens and dozens of charities and boards, and it is always surprising to me when I sit down with them and I say, so what are you here for? Like, what's your why, to use the Simon Sinek sort of phrasing? What's your why? And actually having that articulated clearly is almost the foundation point before we look at, okay, what are we going to invest in? In the paper, if hopefully, if you're joining now, the paper is now out, so you're able to download it. I have a whole section on mission drift, and that really, giving a shout out to Dr. Rashan Alpress. He's the one who reminded me of how important purpose and mission is. And in that section, talking about, we wouldn't want this focus on impact investing to pull us away from our mission. But before we do that, we have to know what our mission is. So I think that would be my first challenge, is, can you actually articulate what you're there for? Because I think for lots of boards, that would even be a struggle. And then to answer your question, I think sometimes, yeah, I think it could be done better. I think that there could be, I think there's more opportunities out there for investment and for supporting different initiatives than people might realize.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is that there is a kind of a fundamental issue that we should grapple with regardless, which is around really understanding your mission and ensuring that you know how that mission can be delivered. And then there is the secondary question of, and then how do we do that best with the resources that are available to us? And at the moment, and the traditional model is, the money is invested, we give out money as a portion of the returns that we have, but that capital must be preserved at all cost. And I spoke at the philanthropy conference in 2019, and I think my charge to the philanthropy sector was that, well, you have failed if you have preserved capital, but not actually done everything you can to actually deal with the mission that you are charged with. So I think there is the duration and longevity are, prized over impact. And I worry with that. I struggle with that concept that somehow it's better for a foundation to exist forever and make a minimal impact rather than to use up all its funds and make a tangible impact on some people. And,
Yeah.
of course, philosophies will differ, but is there a legal reason why that's a tension?
Well, just to touch on that, I think that's a really great point. And by the way, I'm loving the chat. There's heaps of comments and questions and things, so keep it coming. We love that. And at the end, we are going to turn our attention there, and we'll answer as many as we can or comment back if we can. Yeah, on that one, I think that there's a hard question that we have to ask. I wrote a paper with Craig Fisher, who's an amazing guy, accountant with lots of wealth of experience, and we called it 7 Hard Questions that Charities Need to Ask. When I send the link to the video, I'll put a link to that in the email. And one of the questions is, when will we finish our work? Are we perpetuating ourselves? Like, are we continuing to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff? What would it look like for us not to actually exist anymore? And I think that's a really challenging question, particularly if we've gotten entrenched within our organization and our jobs are at the organization. But if you think about it, the best outcome for most charities, the problem they're trying to solve, we should be aiming for how can we actually solve it? How can we get rid of this issue so that we are no longer necessary? Like, let's do ourselves out of a job. For better or worse, unfortunately, there's always going to be lots of things that we need to be involved in. But I think it's kind of a mindset shift. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a case of we're perpetuating our organization because we have always been here. And I think people get too caught up sometimes in the history of their own organization. Like, we were established in 1937 and da 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 da. Yeah, but what were you set up for, and how do we get rid of that problem? That's the real fundamental point. So I think there is a kind of a fundamental issue that can come out sometimes.
Yeah. No, that's a good answer because that's something that for me anyway, I think there is a lot of ego that gets involved in these kinds of things, and it's not clear to me that the purpose should be that you exist forever. The purpose should be to be in service of the problem and the mission that you're there for.
Mm.
Now, I'm drifting a lot from your paper, so I want to bring it back. And
That's okay. I knew this would happen, and that's why I asked you, because I love these rabbit holes. And for those who are interested, Shamubeel and I've spoken before. I do a podcast called Seeds, and it was at the start. I don't know if you remember this, the start of COVID. We had a great conversation. It would be funny to listen back to it now, actually. It was like April 2020, I think, like just at the beginnings. But this is why I wanted to talk to you, because I knew we would go off on these rabbit holes of conversation.
But let me bring it back just for
Okay.
now. So, in your experience, and you deal with a lot of foundations and donors, what are the reasons that they don't currently invest their capital in mission-aligned purposes?
That's a great question. I'd be interested. Why don't we throw it to the team on the call in the comments? What have you seen as reasons? One of the reasons that I've seen, and I'm going to highlight this one because I think it's something that we can change. Some trust boards and people that I talk to say, well, our statement of investment performance and objectives says that we are limited in what we can invest in. We have to get this financial return. It's written in our SIPO. We have to do it. And it just frustrates me so much. I can't tell you how frustrated I am by this. Who wrote the SIPO? The SIPO is a document that should be there to serve the purposes of the organization. It shouldn't be the other way around. So somebody at some point, perhaps on a typewriter, wrote the SIPO. Why not change the SIPO? Why not, if it is truly limiting you, why not change it? It's not that hard. Just take it to your board, talk about it, and add in a new section which says we will consider impact investing when we're looking at how we deploy our capital. And in the opinion, if you get to the back, there's a schedule. And I thought that it was important to give some actual wording that people could at least use as a coat, a coat hanger, or a put your hat on this. So it's called Model SIPO Wording for Impact Investment. I'm not suggesting that this is the wording for your group. What I'm suggesting is that the principles that underlie the wording there could be adapted for your group. So I just don't want to hear that excuse of, but our SIPO says we can't. Like, change your SIPO.
So let me just get this clear. So there is nothing in the Charities Act or whatever that legally stops you from being able to do this. The only thing that stops is your own policies which is expressed in the SIPO in terms of how you invest your capital. Is that right?
Well, this is always being a lawyer, right? Of course, it's more complicated than that. That's right on the SIPO side. Now, what other people might argue is, yeah, but the Trust Act sets
Mhm.
out duties of trustees. And one of the duties is to invest like a prudent business person. So in the opinion, I address this because there's two types of duties. There's those that you cannot change, and there's those that you can change. So that's putting it very simply, but there's two levels of duties. So there's mandatory ones. You cannot alter them. You have to know the terms of your trust.
Of course.
They're written down. If anybody's following along, they are written down on page 10. So it's knowing the terms of your trust, acting in accordance with the terms of the trust, acting honestly in good faith. It's things like that. Like it's basic
Yeah.
things. But the default duties, the ones that you can alter, are these other ones, and that includes a duty to invest prudently. So if it was something that the trustees felt uncomfortable about, I think that you could actually modify the duty to expand it to allow them to consider, this is the critical bit, we will
Mm.
consider our purposes when we are investing. And so the reason that is so important is that if your purpose is reduction of poverty, then that becomes the filter with which you look at least some of the investments. And just so clear, I'm not saying put 100% of your investments into impact investing. I'm saying start with 2%, start with 4%, work your way up. Maybe it's 10%, and at some point, maybe it's more. And the other thing is, you don't have to go alone. There's actually funds out there. Like if you're worried, I have to do due diligence on all these things, well, just invest in a fund with others who are already investing in impact. So a couple threads there, but hopefully it's
Yeah,
helpful.
no, that's helpful because I think there is this kind of, I think there is this element of not having the skills on many boards of trustees that they don't necessarily have the legal advice or the legal expertise. And prudent investing doesn't mean conservative investment, right? And so I think quite often words that are used by lawyers are not what are interpreted by real people.
Mm.
Not real people, but normal people.
Yeah, no, I take it, and I totally agree. You can probably tell from the nature of how I talk that I'm probably not a typical lawyer, and I know that many lawyers might err. Becoming a lawyer, you're trained in caution. You're there because you studied for 5 years all the things that could go wrong. Like
Yeah.
that's what are the cases? It's usually this went wrong and we shouldn't do this. And so lawyers have a tendency to be conservative, whereas I would say we need to have a more expansive view and we need to be a little bit more aggressive in how we do things, like when it comes to investing, what can we invest in? And I think if trustees or if people were making decisions say, well, we were set up in 1973 to reduce poverty. We are looking at this impact investment. It's going to be $100,000. We have $10 million. We are consciously choosing to take 100,000, put it into this Maori Pacifica education focused startup, which will help people to understand poverty traps and reduce their reliance on, welfare. Like,
Mm.
I think that would be a totally justifiable decision that people make.
Can I just clarify one thing? So, how are these foundation trusts, how do they know they're actually delivering on their mission? Is there any legal requirement for them to actually deliver, measure, and hold themselves accountable? Like, is there an accountability mechanism that's built into it?
I guess the only accountability mechanism that springs to mind is that there's reporting. So
Hmm.
each year you're going to need, assuming they're a charitable entity, so they're registered with Charities Services, they'll need to be uploading reports and financials and things. But it's a great question. And in some ways, there is a lot of discretion for trustees or the board to make decisions. I think one thing that we haven't touched on yet is that I think boards should be reporting on more than just the financials. So a traditional mindset, and if there's accountants on the call, let's look at the numbers. Like we invested
Sure.
this and we got this amount of return. It was this percentage, and therefore tick the box, we can move on. But what if we had a conception about reporting which said, by making this investment, we know that 115 families are now living in clean, green, environmental, sustainable homes because we helped to fund the creation of some social housing. So
Mm.
that's not a financial number. Of those 115 families, there's 60 children, and they're now going to school. It's really hard to measure that if we have only a conception, which is actually kind of a Western mindset, which is
Mm.
the numbers is what matter, like financial numbers. But if we have a conception of the education value of what's going on here, the impact 20 years from now, when that child who was living in a van now has a stable home, like that's important as well.
Yeah. And I think a couple of things that's come up for me from the conversation so far. One is around, I think, the legal settings. The legal settings are not meant to be a fence. They're meant to be a foundation, right? That there's a minima that you have to meet, but
Yeah.
it shouldn't stop you from innovating and looking for new things, right? It's not meant to be that constraint because it's not limiting all options. It's limiting some options and some things. And the other is around the amount of discretion that's in the sector, and that you can, in many ways, write your own rules that are consistent with your mission. But can I just explore just a little bit more, just because you're a lawyer, but are there some good legal reasons for not doing it in terms of impact investing and mission aligned investing? Are there some good reasons why you would not do it?
Well, I mean, this is kind of a basic thing, but I think that boards probably need to upskill themselves before they dive into impact investing. So it's not just a case of saying, oh, well, let's do some good. I heard about this initiative over here. Okay, let's just put some money in. Like you have to actually understand. And so I see a lot of boards where actually they need new people. Frankly
Mm.
speaking, some of the people have been there for 25 years, right? Like they need the fresh perspectives that a next generation voice will bring. So I guess part of the answer here is before you go off and start investing in everything, do you have the skills to be able to do that? And do your advisors have the skills to be able to
Mm.
advise you well? If you've got funds in fund management, if you go to them and say, we would like to do more impact investing, are they able to do that? So that's part of the answer, I think.
And I think a theme that's coming through the questions, and a question that I wrestle with all the time, is around when investing, how will these trustees and the supervisors, the governors, know that the money is working for you? Attribution is so hard, and quite frankly, there's so many grifters that are out there that prey on the not NFB sector. If you're
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, we'll give you this impact report, and it's going to be amazing, and it's going to cost you X many tens of thousands of dollars," but it doesn't actually give you true attribution. So, you know, where is the position? Again, it's kind of like, to me, it feels like the law is not very clear in terms of what are the kinds of things you should measure to know that you're delivering on your duties and your mission. And it feels like it's very gray.
Mm. Yeah, I don't have a solid answer on that particular point, to be honest. I think it is a bit gray, and I think ultimately it comes back to the trustees. I always think of the looking in the mirror test. Can you look in the mirror and legitimately say you've fulfilled your duties, that you've actually worked together to advance your purposes? I think that's why it's good to have diverse boards as well, to be able to
Mm.
have different perspectives on what it is that we should be investing in.
Yeah, and I think we use the word duties, and in this case, from a legal perspective, right? The duties of a because there's particular legal powers that are vested in you. But also from a, like, especially when you're in the trusts and foundation, there's also a moral duty in terms of making the connection. And you know, again, that's a real tension because the moral duty, requires a different level of due diligence
Mm.
to the legal duties, right? And so does the law and the sector as it stands, does it push you towards conservatism? Do you know what I mean? Like, because you almost have this kind of this duty to not lose it. You are inherently more conservative as a result. Or am I over interpreting?
No, I think you're accurate. I think that's the problem is that as soon as people sit down in the boardroom table, there's almost this natural tendency. It's like you absorb the mood, the vibe
Mm.
of the people there. And I think there probably is this, the way I was describing, the natural conservatism for lawyers. I think there is a tendency to say, okay, we've got our financial report. Oh, this is good. We have this amount in reserves. Gosh, there's a lot of headwinds coming, isn't there? How are we going to keep it? Because we wouldn't want
Yeah.
to be the ones that lost the money. We wouldn't imagine that, our reputations. And we're here, again, it comes back to we're here to keep it safe for the rainy day. And all I'm trying to do is expand on that and say, I'm not saying don't do that. I'm saying you can still keep things safe, but what if you freed up a portion of what you do and you had a bigger conception about how you do it? And I've been using figures like $1 million and 100,000, but I know that there's probably people on this call that have access to potentially $100 million, $200 million. There's a lot of money out there. So if you do those percentages, if you took 5% of 100 million, that's $5 million. That can have significant impact. If it's 200 million, you know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
then, but along with that, what if all of the trusts, all of the foundations, all of the family-led initiatives, if everybody said, we're going to collectively come together and agree, we're going to try for a 5%. First of all, it would upskill the governance because all of a sudden everybody's mindset is expanding and thinking, where's the opportunities? Where's the green shoots that will die if nobody comes alongside them? But secondly, like add it up, like there would be billions. And if you took 5% of billions, that would have a massive impact across all different areas. And I think there are opportunities for this type of investment. We might touch on, for example, one that you and I are involved in, housing, but there's others in education, poverty, Pacifica Maori. There's lots of different ways where there are good causes, good people doing good stuff. They need money to back them to be able to do more good. So,
Mm. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. But what I'm hearing from you also is that the investing does not need to be done alone, and that mission-aligned investing can be done in a group, that there is an opportunity for the funders and the donors to work together because they might have economies of scale and greater access to expertise in due diligence and those kinds of things as well, which doesn't necessarily come naturally to this group of people
yeah.
because they're not set up in that particular way.
And just
I'm
to pick up on that point, just really briefly, I think you're right. Sometimes there's a scarcity mindset which comes to this sector because we're applying for grants and they're applying for grants too, the same grant. So we
Yeah.
couldn't possibly collaborate and work together. Wait a minute, let's change our mindset here. What if we came together? What if, like, there's still
Yeah.
more than 100 people listening to this right now. What if some of those people came together and said, what would this challenge mean practically for us? What if 50 charities came together in a coalition and said, we're putting ourselves forward as we're going to look at this 5% or 4% or 6% or whatever? That would have a
Mm.
massive impact. And then you're right. Why not spread the load? Instead of everybody all doing due diligence on an opportunity, what if you came together and you had one advisor or one
Mm.
person helping so that you weren't spending multiple fees out to look at what you could invest in? Like I know it's a mindset shift, but that's what this call is about. We want to challenge thinking.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I was trying to get to is I think you are asking us, all of those people who are involved in the sector, to kind of lift our sights, not just in the way we look at our money at the moment, but also how we think about competition, cooperation, working together. There's a whole lot of really big challenges that are actually in that legal document. It looks pretty short, but there is a lot that's packed in there. Now, I'm going to ask you one final question, but I'd like to offer the opportunity for the listeners to maybe ask any burning questions in the chat now, so that after Stephen asks this question, I can ask you those questions on their behalf. Stephen, in your legal opinion, you had kind of 9 practical realities that people are faced with when in impact investing. Can you run us through those 9 realities? Because I think they were really quite helpful.
Yeah. I'm glad you raised that because, and I want to give a shout out to Alistair Rhodes, who's the chair of the Impact Investing Network. Credit to him because he was the one, I sent him a first version, which frankly speaking, legal opinions are boring, right? So it was like, sure, we've got this legal stuff and yeah, there's duties and we can modify SIPOs and things, but what are the practical realities, the hard realities which might stop us from doing that? So if you haven't downloaded it yet, you can download it and read it yourself. In part 3, I've just outlined 9 practical realities. And I want to mention, I had a whole bunch of people who've been behind the scenes supporting and providing input. I tried to list as many as I could remember at the end, but then inevitably that's always a bad idea because you're going to miss someone. I wanted to mention Rahul from Philanthropy New Zealand, who was able to give me some really good insights as well. Apologies, I didn't put your name in the list, but you were appreciated too. So yeah, reality 1, change takes time to implement. Like it's not going to happen overnight. Don't think you're going to go to your next board meeting and say, okay, here's what we're all agreed on. Take people on the journey. I hope that this is a tool that will help you to have discussions. That's all that if I get one thing, if I have somebody say, hey, we talked about it at the board meeting, and maybe we decided not to do impact investing, but at least we had the discussion. So reality 1, change takes time. Reality 2, you have to ask your advisors to implement your decisions. So you might say, right, we are going to look at this investing for impact with a portion of our fund. You got to tell someone, like, you got to do this. And if your advisors are looking at you going, what would this be? Are you talking about negative screening, like no tobacco? Is that it? It's got to get the right people to help you. This is more than just we're not investing in that class or something like that. Reality 3, we've already talked about, you can start small. Like you don't have to invest everything. Reality 4, what is your purpose? That's one of my big challenges. Can you articulate it? This is the elevator pitch moment. You're in an elevator for 20 seconds. What do you do? Tell me, 20 seconds. Reality 5, using the tools at your disposal. Like there's actually a lot of ways that you can approach impact investing. One of the ones that we haven't talked about is that you could set up a subsidiary company, which then does investments, or maybe it itself is out solving a problem or a crisis. I wrote a book called Social Enterprise in New Zealand, a legal handbook. So there's a link to there. There's a link to a steward ownership paper that I co-wrote with a bunch of amazing people. I think Philippa Wilkie might be on this call, and she has been involved over the years in different initiatives. And there's an impact investing thing that I helped write with the Center for Social Impact. Reality 6, report on the impact. Like we touched on this, more than just the numbers. Reality 7, what is the role of your organization? Like, what are you here for? What is the unique catalyst thing that you will do? Reality 8, this might impact who sits on your boards, right? Honestly, I talked with some trusts and I admire the endurance of the people involved, but if you have the same board members who were there 30 years ago, maybe you need some fresh voices. I know that's challenging, but I think it's important to think about it. And reality 9, double materiality matters. So to just really simply, it's not just about how external factors affect you. So take climate change. How is climate change affecting our organization? Double materiality says, how are we impacting the world? So in other words, how are we contributing to climate change? That's just one example, but you get the point. It's not just about how something affects you, it's about how you affect other things. So yeah, hope that that's helpful. Just calling it like I see it. There's 9 practical hard things that are barriers.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in that, right? Um, there's a bunch of really good questions that are coming through, but just kind of earlier on while we were speaking, 3 questions really came up for me. So one was around just the information gap that
Yep.
quite often the mission might be that, it's poverty, but which bits of poverty do you want to deal with? So the data is not clear, the causality is not clear. Sometimes it's really, really hard to do all of those kinds of things. And so when you're faced with that, you know, how do you know that you've done your duty as a trustee or a board member, that you are actually mission aligned? Like, is it just you do it gradually and progressively improve, or are there some legal requirements that you need to be afraid of, or is the legal system quite permissive in allowing you to kind of learn by doing and build up that knowledge over time?
Yeah, I mean, my view is that it's a little, so I'm doing the Queenstown Half Marathon at the end of the year, for better or worse. Maybe see some of you there. If I went out today to run the half marathon, do you know what would happen to me? I would probably fall over and maybe not recover. But between now and November, if I implement change and if I go for a daily run or, start increasing, I will become the type of person who can run a half marathon by the end of the year. So it's the same with boards, I think. Don't
Mm.
don't run before you can walk. I hope that this session, that the paper will challenge people to start on the journey. And I think that there is quite a lot of permissiveness in terms of what is the board's role. I would say that it's a learning journey and you're not going to have all the answers right away. In fact, if any of you on the call have all the answers, I don't believe you. I think none of us know everything. And so boards themselves as well, the boards that I'm on, I know that we are on various stages of learning and journeying, and that's okay from a legal perspective, because I think the law, a judge would come and say, well, who is the person involved here? What is it that they're doing? That would be an important part. Like I'm on a board right now, we're looking at Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Like, what does this mean for us? It's a great question. Do we have the answers? Not fully. We know that it's a journey that we need to go on. So it's, recognizing that it will take time.
But I take a lot of comfort from that because I think sometimes we see the law, at least from the outside, as quite black and white. But in reality, it's a lot more permissive, and there is a lot of room for us to kind of interpret it in a way that's consistent to our values and aspirations. So I
Mhm.
don't think we should lose sight of that. The other kind of we're quickly running out of time, but a couple of other questions that I think that are worth kind of just unpacking quickly is, when there is this kind of we've kind of talked about investing, charities, philanthropies, funders, all in one kind of big blob. But actually, there are different parts to it, aren't there? There are people who are delivering the services. There's the money that's invested, and which of the money is used in what way. Do you want to give us a little bit of a compartment in terms of how we might think about those different parts?
About, can you,
Well,
I
I
was
mean,
just typing in for the chat, so I just put another link into the report. Can you phrase that? Yeah, tell me the last
let me
part.
clarify. So I think there is the money that's invested that's to be used for good.
Yeah,
Then there's how you invest that money, and then how you disperse that money, and then how that's kind of delivered by the provider, whoever is doing the program delivery.
yeah,
And these are quite often separate and distinct things, right?
yep.
And isn't that part of the challenge is when we're talking about impact, sometimes the impact is being siloed in
Mm.
that the impact happens by the delivery agency and the money kind of sits over here in this isolated, separate thing. Is that the barrier that you're trying to break down?
That is the barrier I'm trying to break down. It's
Okay.
I think it's wrong to think in silos and to think about the capital that we're sitting on keep it safe, keep it hidden as being removed or separate from the impact that we want to have. Because ultimately, why were you endowed, or where did the money come from? It came to advance a charitable purpose, or it came to have impact in the world. So if we start bifurcating our thinking and saying, well, as a board, we're focused on the impact and we're giving out grants and funding here, and forget about the money that we actually sit on, because that's just there and it will always be there forever. I think that's doing a disservice to the whole concept. That's what I'm trying to break down, is that we have a responsibility as board members to look just as seriously as the money that's sitting on term deposit with a mainstream bank and earning X amount of interest. And if anything, we have I would say, a duty or an obligation to be thinking about the impact that that is having, which is negligible apart from the interest rate we're getting and the profits that are going offshore. And I think it's incumbent on us to look at that in a very proactive way and say, actually, we need to reconsider how it is that we look and think about the money that we have. So instead of it being a line item in a financial report that everyone glances over at the next board meeting, that $12 million that's on 3-year term deposit at this much interest rate, we should be thinking, is that the best use of our funds? Are we advancing our charitable purpose through the use of that funds? And could we do better? And my answer, I think, would be there probably is something else that you could look to invest in.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what I hear from you, when we converse outside of this as well, that it's really about how do we take away those sort of mental boundaries that we put around how we do things. I think it makes it easier for us to be able to deal with the complexities of the world by putting things in silos. But by doing so, I think we're not actually achieving or delivering on a mission as well as we could. I'm just really conscious of time.
And that may be as well, like I know there's some comments coming through, like our auditors require this or they're unimaginative and we're constrained. But I think this is a challenge across not just boardrooms. I think it's a challenge to the professionals who are listening. Hopefully there's some fellow lawyers. Like, we need to open our minds to help our clients to conceive this way. The fellow, other professionals, accountants, auditors, it can't just be the board saying, well, let's invest in impact. I think we have to have the paradigm shift that looks at the 100 years and says, what will life be like for my great-grandchildren? And then bring that to what we're doing today. I know this is challenging. I know it hasn't been done in the past. That's why I wrote the report. That's why I want you to go away from this, hopefully questioning, maybe doubting, maybe not liking what I've said, because that is how we get change.
That's awesome. Stephen, thank you. I'm just really conscious that we've kind of used up our hour, and I think we've answered most of the questions that were in the chat. But if there are any other questions, feel free to drop Stephen and I an email, or just Stephen, because he's the brains behind this. But Stephen, as always, real pleasure to have a conversation with you on, I think, a topic that's really close to both our hearts. But what I really like about this legal opinion is that it's something that people can use. It's practical. And I hope lots of people will read it and consider it in their decision-making conversations. Yeah. So I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much. And I guess just to wrap up from my perspective, like I can't tell you how many hours have been spent. I know it's not that long, but it takes longer to write shorter. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Jamie Small from WordShop, who really helped with the design. It's a beautiful document. If you're interested, drop me a line. If you got an upcoming report or something, acknowledgement to him. The other thing is that this is really a continuation of a conversation. So last year in October, we had the Seeds Impact Conference. We had 500 people attending online, 32 sessions, 100 speakers. And thank you, Shamubeel, for being at that one as well. And I view this, I'm going to be running these as one-off sort of events in the whole coming year, and focusing on different things. So the next one I'm planning, haven't decided on the date yet, probably in May or June, but I want to continue this conversation by asking, what would it practically look like for a sector? And the sector that I've chosen, because I care about it a lot, is social housing. And so I'm going to be gathering a panel of people to talk about housing. Shamubeel and I are both on a board of a group called Community Finance. We've raised, just as an example of a paradigm shift, we've raised more than $163 million to go to social housing. So that will be one of the case studies at that session, but there will be others as well. So this is an invitation that this is an ongoing thing. There's a lot of work to be done. We all need to support each other and work together to get somewhere. The other thing is that I have a 20-minute commute every day. I know that that's shocking to you people in Auckland, like, wow, it's so long, 20 minutes. But I'm listening to the radio as I drive along or drop off my children at school. I would rather use that 20 minutes talking to one of you who's been challenged today or who has something that you'd like to talk about. So this, I know this is unusual, very rare for a lawyer to offer something for free, but I'm very happy to have conversations and continue dialogues. And that goes as well if you're part of a board and you want a challenge like this. I'm very happy. Obviously, depends on the time and everything. I'm happy to come and speak remotely or jump in and just tell them about the paper so that you can then use it as a catalyst to start a conversation. So those are two offers, a commute time chat or I'm happy to talk with you. Yeah. And then the final thing from me is if you're willing, like if you've enjoyed this conversation and I've been challenged by it, I knew I would be, and Shamubeel is a great conversation partner. Would you help me when I send the video of this around? There will be a link and the paper will be attached. Would you please, if you're willing, consider sending it to 3 people or 5 people or even more, because I want the message to get out there. And I can only do as much as I can do. But this is a community. I'm asking for your help. That's basically what I'm doing. Would you be willing to share it and tell other people about this? Because I only know the people I know, but I know all of you know people as well. So I've put in LinkedIn. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, love to connect there. There's a post that's gone up. That's an easy way to share, but be watching for my email. I'm going to take this video, we're going to edit it, and it's going to come out this afternoon. So there will be something in your inbox in a couple hours. And that's a way, if the kaupapa resonates, that's a way to help. So I've learned it's better just to ask for things rather than just assume. So I hope it's okay to make that. I know it's not, normal to ask for things, but I'm trying to do better at that. Now, what we're going to do, well, the final thing, Shamubeel, thank you so much. Really appreciate your insights. It's awesome to hear from you. Just as a personal thing, Shamubeel, we talked the other day, and I was asking you how it was going, and you said, I'm just having lots of fun. And I thought, wow, that is such a great statement. And can I say that about myself? Fortunately, I can. But my encouragement to all of you is have Shamubeel's attitude. Like, what are you doing? And have some fun with it. Let's be creative. Let's enjoy it. Life is too short. So there you go. That's my little thought of the day to share with you. But thank you, Shamubeel. Really appreciate it.